The golden anniversary celebration for Charles and Evelyn Marston was a grand affair. Friends and family from all corners of the country had gathered at the Marstons' sprawling estate, draped in golden lights and adorned with roses, a testament to 50 years of matrimony. Charles, ever the charming host, raised his glass to deliver a toast. His deep voice echoed through the crowd, recounting memories of shared struggles and triumphs. Evelyn, standing by his side, smiled warmly at her guests, though her fingers gripped the stem of her champagne glass with a steadiness born of determination rather than ease. As the applause faded, Evelyn stepped forward, her emerald green gown shimmering under the soft glow of the chandeliers. "Before we continue with the festivities," she began, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the buzz of conversation, "I have something I'd like to share." The room fell silent. Guests leaned in, anticipating a heartfelt proclamation or a nostalgic anecdote. What followed, however, was neither. Evelyn produced a slim manila folder from behind her back. 50 years of marriage is a long time," she said, her eyes locking onto Charles's. "And in that time you learn a lot about the person you've pledged your life to." Charles's smile faltered. "Evelyn, what is this?" "You'll find out," she interrupted, her tone calm but unyielding. She opened the folder, revealing a collection of photographs, receipts, and printed email exchanges. She held them aloft for the crowd to see, her every movement deliberate and precise. "This," she said, her voice now tinged with an edge of emotion, "is proof of the affair Charles has been having for the past 10 years. With his secretary." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Whispers of disbelief ricocheted through the room. Charles turned pale, his previously confident demeanor collapsing into shock. Evelyn continued, undeterred. "For a decade, I've watched as he lied to me, as he smiled at me and promised me the world while betraying everything we built together. I stayed silent, for the sake of our children, for the sake of appearances, but not tonight." "Evelyn," Charles stepped forward, his voice pleading, "let's talk about this privately. This isn't the time or place." She met his gaze with a stare so cold it froze him mid-step. "The time and place is now, Charles. Our golden anniversary. The perfect moment to expose the tarnished truth." Several guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or slip away unnoticed. One of their daughters, Rebecca, stood frozen in shock, while her brother, Mark, stared daggers at their father. "I'm filing for divorce," Evelyn announced, her voice unwavering, effective immediately. This celebration was never about 50 years of love. It was about giving myself the closure I deserve. The room was silent, save for the soft clink of a glass being set down in the far corner. Evelyn turned on her heel, the folder still in her hand, and walked towards the exit. Guests parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mix of astonishment and discomfort. Before leaving, she paused and glanced back at the man she had once loved. "Happy anniversary, Charles." With that, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind a room filled with stunned silence and a husband drowning in the wreckage of his own deceit. As Evelyn exited the ballroom, a wave of whispers swept through the stunned crowd. Some guests hurried to the exits, uncomfortable with the drama, while others lingered, waiting for the aftermath to unfold. Charles stood rooted to the spot, his face a canvas of humiliation and panic. His secretary, a strikingly younger woman named Vanessa, had been discreetly standing near the bar throughout the evening. Now every eye turned to her. Vanessa flushed red but tried to maintain her composure, her fingers clutching the edge of her glass. When the whispers became unbearable, she placed her drink down and slipped toward the side door, hoping to escape unnoticed. But Rebecca, Charles and Evelyn's eldest daughter, wasn't going to let her leave that easily. She intercepted Vanessa near the exit, her voice cold and sharp. "You don't get to walk away so quickly. Not after what you've done to my family." "I didn't," Vanessa started, her voice trembling. "Save it," Rebecca snapped. "You've been lying to all of us, just like him. You think that just because you're young and pretty, you can destroy my parents' marriage and walk away like none of this matters." Charles, now realizing that Vanessa was cornered, rushed forward. Rebecca, enough. This is between your mother and me, not you. Rebecca turned to him, her expression full of fury. Don't you dare tell me to back off, Dad. I trusted you. We all did. And you've been sneaking around behind Mom's back for years. Do you have any idea what this will do to Mark and me? To our family? Mark joined his sister, his hands clenched into fists. You know what, Dad? You're pathetic. Mom deserved better. We all did. Vanessa, now overwhelmed, muttered something about needing to leave and darted out the door. Charles tried to go after her, but Rebecca blocked his path. You don't get to run after her and play the hero, she hissed. Face what you've done. Meanwhile, outside the estate, Evelyn stood near the valet, her breath fogging in the cool night air. She had left the party, but not before ensuring every piece of evidence she had collected was in the right hands. Earlier that week, she had consulted a lawyer and provided copies of everything. Tonight had been her moment to claim back her dignity and end the facade. One of her closest friends, Marjorie, caught up with her outside. Evelyn, she called gently. Are you all right? Evelyn turned to her friend, her expression weary but resolute. I'm fine, Marjorie. For the first time in years, I feel free. Marjorie squeezed her hand. I hope you know how brave you were in there. Couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Evelyn admitted. But it was necessary. I wasted too much time pretending everything was fine. Tonight, I got my life back. Inside the ballroom, the celebration had devolved into chaos. Guests were either consoling one another, exchanging scandalized gossip, or confronting Charles, who now looked like a shadow of his former self. The man who had once commanded respect and admiration was now being shunned by the very people he had entertained moments before. As Evelyn's car pulled away from the estate, she allowed herself a small smile. Her life was about to change drastically, but it was a change she welcomed. She had spent 30 years living in the shadow of someone else's deceit. Now, she was stepping into the light, determined to write her own story, one of strength, dignity, and a future free from lies. In the days following the anniversary, the fallout from Evelyn's revelation spread like wildfire. News of Charles Marston's public disgrace reached beyond the social circles of the wealthy elite. Whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into headlines, splashed across local papers. Golden anniversary turned sour as wife exposes decade-long affair. Evelyn, meanwhile, had retreated to a quiet lakeside cabin she had rented weeks before the party. She needed space to breathe, to process, and to plan her next steps. The cabin was simple but cozy, its rustic charm a sharp contrast to the grandeur she had lived in for decades. Here, she found solace in the stillness, the only sounds being the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. Her phone, however, refused to remain silent. Messages of support poured in from friends, distant relatives, and even strangers who had heard her story. But there were also attempts from Charles. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts filled with apologies and pleas. Evelyn ignored them all. She wasn't ready to hear his excuses, and she doubted she ever would be. One morning, as she sat on the porch with a steaming cup of tea, her lawyer, Patricia Nolan, arrived with a thick folder of documents. Patricia was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been guiding Evelyn through the legal process. Good morning, Patricia said, setting her briefcase on the small table. I've got the initial divorce paperwork ready. We'll need your signature on a few forms to get things moving. Evelyn nodded. I've been waiting for this. As Patricia spread out the papers, she hesitated. There's one other thing, Evelyn. I did some digging as you requested. About Charles's finances. Evelyn's brows furrowed. And Patricia slid a sheet across the table. He's been hiding assets. Offshore accounts, shell companies, he's been funneling money away for years. If we play our cards right, you'll not only get a fair settlement, but you'll expose him for the fraud he is. Evelyn stared at the document, anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Of course he has, she muttered. I should have known his betrayal went beyond just infidelity. Patricia leaned in. We can use this to your advantage, but it will take time to uncover everything. Are you prepared for that? Evelyn looked out at the lake, its surface shimmering in the morning light. I've waited this long, Patricia. I can wait a little longer. Back in the city, Charles was unraveling. His secretary-turned-mistress, Vanessa, had quit her job and severed all ties, unwilling to face the scrutiny that followed their exposure. Business associates began to distance themselves, wary of the scandal's impact on Charles's once flawless reputation. Even his closest friends were reluctant to take his calls, their loyalty to Evelyn overshadowing their sympathy for him. One evening, as Charles sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of bourbon, he received an email. It was from Evelyn. For a brief moment, his heart leapt. Perhaps this was her way of extending an olive branch. But as he opened it, the words struck him like a hammer. Charles, by now you must understand the gravity of your actions. I didn't simply expose your affair to humiliate you. I did it to reclaim my life and to ensure that the truth, every sordid detail, comes to light. I found the money you've been hiding. Patricia is working to uncover the rest. You will not walk away from this unscathed, and you will not manipulate me into silence. You once told me that gold is the symbol of a 50th anniversary because it represents strength and resilience. Well, Charles, I am stronger and more resilient than you ever gave me credit for. This is not revenge. It's justice. Evelyn. Charles stared at the screen, his hands trembling. For the first time, he realized that Evelyn was no longer the woman he thought he could control. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she was determined to dismantle everything he had built on lies. Evelyn, far away from the chaos, felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she also knew one thing for certain. She was finally free. Weeks turned into months, and the divorce proceedings between Charles and Evelyn Marston became a spectacle that captivated not just their social circle, but the public at large. Evelyn, once seen as a quiet, dutiful wife, emerged as a formidable force, her poised demeanor masking the storm she was unleashing behind the scenes. The investigation into Charles's finances, spearheaded by Patricia, revealed layers of deceit far beyond Evelyn's initial discovery. Offshore accounts tied to shady investments, falsified tax records, and transactions that pointed to years of financial impropriety, all meticulously documented. Evelyn now had not just grounds for a fair divorce settlement, but the ammunition to dismantle Charles's reputation in the business world. Meanwhile, Charles's attempts to salvage his standing were proving futile. His legal team, once confident in their ability to outmaneuver Evelyn, was now on the defensive. Every court appearance saw Evelyn calm and composed, while Charles grew more desperate, his polished facade cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. During one particularly heated session, Charles's attorney attempted to argue that Evelyn's actions, publicly exposing the affair and airing the financial misconduct, had been vindictive and damaging to Charles's professional life. Evelyn's response was swift and devastating. She rose from her seat, her voice steady but sharp. Vindictive? You think exposing the truth is vindictive? For years, I stood by this man while he lied to me, to our children, to everyone who trusted him. I didn't destroy his career. He did that himself when he chose deceit over integrity. The courtroom fell silent as her words reverberated. Charles slumped in his chair, his face a mixture of anger and shame. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, eager for sound bites. Evelyn ignored their questions, walking briskly to her car, her chin held high. She had no interest in the spectacle. Her focus remained on the future. One evening, as she sat in the cabin, flipping through old photo albums, Rebecca and Mark arrived unannounced. They had grown closer to their mother in the wake of the scandal, their bond strengthening as they supported her through the ordeal. "Mom," Rebecca said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're so proud of you." Evelyn smiled, her eyes misty. "It hasn't been easy, but I couldn't have done it without you too." Mark, usually stoic, leaned against the fireplace, his voice uncharacteristically emotional. "I always thought Dad was invincible, you know? Like nothing could touch him. But you showed me that real strength isn't about power or money. It's about standing up for what's right." Evelyn reached out, pulling both her children into a tight embrace. For the first time in years, she felt an unshakable sense of unity within her family. As the legal battle neared its conclusion, Evelyn received a surprising phone call. It was from Marjorie, her close friend who had been at her side through the ordeal. "Evelyn, you need to see this," Marjorie said, her voice tinged with urgency. Marjorie emailed Evelyn a link to an investigative report published by a prominent business magazine. The headline read, "From Mogul to Manipulator: The Fall of Charles Marston." The article detailed not just his financial misconduct, but testimonials from former employees who described a pattern of intimidation and exploitation. Evelyn read the article carefully, her emotions a mix of vindication and sadness. She hadn't sought to destroy Charles completely, only to claim what was rightfully hers and expose the truth. But the truth, she realized, had a way of unraveling everything built on lies. In the final divorce hearing, Evelyn was awarded a substantial settlement, including the estate. Charles, now facing potential criminal charges for his financial schemes, was left with little more than the clothes on his back and the tarnished remnants of his reputation. On the day she officially regained ownership of the estate, Evelyn stood in the grand foyer, the light streaming through the tall windows. It no longer felt like a symbol of her entrapment. Now it was hers, a place to rebuild, to redefine, to start anew. Rebecca and Mark arrived shortly after, carrying boxes filled with personal items Evelyn had left behind during her stay at the cabin. Together, they unpacked, laughing and reminiscing as they worked. The house, once a stage for deceit, was now filled with the warmth of family. That evening, Evelyn stood on the balcony, gazing out at the expansive gardens. The golden anniversary celebration felt like a distant memory, a chapter in a book she had finally closed. She smiled, breathing in the cool night air. She was no longer defined by her marriage or the betrayal that had nearly broken her. She was Evelyn Marston, a woman who had faced the storm and come out stronger, ready to write the next chapter of her life on her own terms. Months passed, and Evelyn Marston began to settle into her new life. The estate, once a monument to her husband's ego, now reflected her own sense of style and identity. She hired a team to renovate it, stripping away the ostentatious decor and replacing it with warm, inviting spaces filled with personal touches. The house no longer whispered of betrayal. It sang of resilience and renewal. Evelyn also threw herself into community work, using her newfound independence and resources to support local charities. Her name, once tied to the scandal, now became associated with her philanthropic efforts. She helped fund scholarships for young women, invested in shelters for domestic abuse survivors, and established a program offering legal aid to women trapped in manipulative relationships. It was her way of transforming her pain into purpose. One sunny afternoon, Evelyn hosted a small gathering for the local women's shelter she had been working with. The event, held in the estate's lush garden, was intimate and cheerful, a stark contrast to the grandeur of her anniversary party months earlier. Among the guests was Marjorie, her steadfast friend, who watched Evelyn with pride. "You've done something incredible here," Marjorie said, handing Evelyn a glass of iced tea. "You've taken everything Charles tried to destroy and turned it into something meaningful." Evelyn smiled, her gaze sweeping over the happy faces of her guests. "It hasn't been easy, but I've realized that life is about how you choose to rise after the fall." As the guests mingled, a young woman approached Evelyn hesitantly. She introduced herself as Clara, a recent college graduate who had received one of Evelyn's scholarships. "I just wanted to say thank you," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Because of you, I was able to finish school and start a career. You've inspired me to help others, too." Evelyn's eyes softened, and she placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. "That means more to me than you'll ever know. Keep moving forward. You're capable of amazing things." That evening, as the last of the guests departed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn sat on the balcony, her favorite spot in the estate. The golden hues of the setting sun painted the gardens below, a reminder of the symbolism of her anniversary. Gold, after all, wasn't just about strength, it was also about transformation. Rebecca and Mark joined her, each holding a glass of wine. They had been by her side throughout the journey, their own relationships with her and with each other stronger than ever. Rebecca raised her glass. To Mom, the strongest woman we know, Mark chimed in, smiling. And the one who taught us what real dignity looks like. Evelyn laughed, touched by their words. They clinked glasses, the sound crisp and clear in the evening air. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a profound sense of peace. Not far from the estate, Charles Marston sat in a modest apartment, a far cry from the life he once knew. The world he had built through deceit and manipulation had crumbled, leaving him isolated and bitter. He often thought about reaching out to Evelyn, not to mend their relationship, but to seek her forgiveness. Yet he knew it was too late. Evelyn had moved on, leaving him behind to face the consequences of his choices. Evelyn, meanwhile, had no time to dwell on the past. She was too busy building a future filled with purpose and joy. Her journey had been painful, but it had led her to a place of strength she never knew she possessed. As the stars began to twinkle above, Evelyn tilted her head back and closed her eyes. Life, she realized, was unpredictable and often unfair. But it was also beautiful in its ability to offer second chances. And she intended to make the most of hers. A year after the infamous anniversary, Evelyn Marston's life had transformed into a tapestry of new beginnings. The estate, now affectionately referred to as Evelyn's Haven by friends and family, had become a hub for community events and charitable initiatives. Its once sterile opulence had softened into a home full of life, laughter, and purpose. Rebecca and Mark had embraced their mother's vision, actively participating in the causes she championed. Rebecca, who had taken a sabbatical from her corporate career, began organizing mentorship programs for young women. Mark, an architect, contributed his skills by designing shelters and resource centers funded by Evelyn's foundation. On a breezy spring morning, Evelyn found herself standing before a podium in the estate's garden, addressing a small crowd gathered for the opening of a new counseling center for survivors of abusive relationships. The center, named the Phoenix Project, symbolized rebirth and resilience, qualities Evelyn now held dear. As she spoke, her voice was steady, carrying the weight of her journey but also the hope of her future. "This center is a testament to the strength we all have within us," she said. "It's a place where pain can be transformed into power, and where endings are only the start of something new. My own story brought me here, but this place belongs to every woman who needs a chance to rise again." The crowd erupted in applause, and Evelyn stepped down from the podium, greeted by a sea of smiling faces. Marjorie approached, her eyes glistening. "Evelyn, I've known you for decades, but I've never been prouder to call you my friend." Evelyn hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Marjorie, for everything." Later that evening, Evelyn returned to her balcony, a cup of chamomile tea in hand. The quiet serenity of the gardens below mirrored the peace she felt within. The stars shone brightly, as if celebrating her triumph. As she gazed into the night, her thoughts wandered to Charles. Despite everything, she didn't harbor bitterness anymore. She had won not by defeating him but by reclaiming herself. And yet, she knew the ripples of her actions still touched him. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that Charles had sold what little remained of his assets to pay off mounting debts. Rumor had it he had moved to a small town, far from the life of luxury he once adored. Evelyn didn't pity him. She understood that his downfall was a consequence of his choices. But she also hoped, in some distant part of her heart, that he might find the strength to change as she had. Rebecca and Mark joined her on the balcony, as had become their tradition. Rebecca handed her a folded piece of paper. "Mom, this came for you today." Evelyn opened it cautiously. The handwriting was unmistakable Charles's. "Evelyn, I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I won't insult you by asking for it. But I wanted to thank you for exposing me. You forced me to confront the man I had become, and while I wish I could undo the harm I caused, I can't. I've started over in the only way I know how. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. For what it's worth, I hope you found the happiness I took from you. You deserve it, Charles." Evelyn folded the note and placed it on the table. For a moment, she sat in silence, the words lingering in the air. "What did he say?" Mark asked hesitantly. "Nothing that changes anything," Evelyn replied with a small smile. "But perhaps it's a step toward his own redemption." Rebecca placed a hand on her mother's arm. "You're incredible, Mom. I don't think I could be that gracious." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Grace isn't about him, darling. It's about me. Holding on to anger would only weigh me down. Letting go? That's my freedom." As the three of them sat together under the starlit sky, Evelyn felt a deep contentment. Her story wasn't about a marriage that had ended in betrayal. It was about a woman who had risen from its ashes, stronger and brighter than ever before. She wasn't defined by the past anymore. The future was hers, and it was golden. Months passed, and Evelyn's life continued to flourish. Her name, once synonymous with scandal, was now a beacon of hope in her community. The Phoenix Project expanded rapidly, with new branches opening in neighboring cities. Evelyn's story had inspired countless women to reclaim their lives, and her foundation became a testament to her enduring strength. One crisp autumn morning, Evelyn received a call from an unexpected voice, Detective Lila Cross, the officer who had once overseen the initial investigation into Charles's financial crimes. Lila's voice was measured but carried an undertone of urgency. "Mrs. Marston, I hope you're doing well," Lila began. "I wanted to inform you of a development regarding your ex-husband." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened slightly. Though she had moved on, Charles remained a distant shadow in her mind. "What's happened?" "It seems Charles has been implicated in a new investigation," Lila said. "A whistleblower came forward, linking him to fraudulent contracts during his time at Marston Enterprises. It's serious, and we may need your help to untangle some of the financial documents you provided during the divorce proceedings." Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "I thought I was done with all this." "I understand," Lila said gently, "but your cooperation could be crucial. And, Mrs. Marston, this may finally bring a definitive end to his schemes." After a moment of reflection, Evelyn agreed. She wasn't doing this out of vengeance. She was doing it to ensure that no one else would fall victim to Charles's deceit. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn worked closely with the authorities, providing context and clarifications on the documents Patricia had unearthed during the divorce. As the case against Charles built momentum, Evelyn found herself in the peculiar position of being both a witness and a key figure in his downfall. During one meeting with Detective Cross, Evelyn asked, "What happens to him now?" Lila looked up from her notes. "If convicted, he'll likely face significant prison time. The evidence is overwhelming." Evelyn nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of her still mourned the man she had once loved, the version of Charles that had been kind, ambitious, and full of promise. But that man had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone consumed by greed and arrogance. The trial was a media sensation. Evelyn chose not to attend the courtroom proceedings, preferring to focus on her work and her family. However, the headlines were impossible to ignore. Charles Marston found guilty of fraud and embezzlement. Rebecca and Mark, who had distanced themselves from their father, found solace in the verdict. "It's justice," Rebecca said over dinner one evening, "for everything he did to us." "To you?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Justice has its place, but so does forgiveness. I hope this is the wake-up call he needed to change." Mark shook his head. "You're too generous, Mom." "Perhaps," she replied, "but I'd rather leave the past behind than carry it with me." A few weeks later, Evelyn received another letter from Charles, this one sent from the penitentiary where he awaited sentencing. She debated whether to open it but ultimately decided to read it. "Evelyn, I've lost everything. My freedom, my reputation, and most of all, the family I took for granted. Sitting in this cell, I've had time to reflect on what I became. You were right to expose me. I deserved it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I am trying to make amends in whatever small way I can. I've agreed to cooperate fully with the authorities to recover what was stolen, even if it won't undo the damage. You were always stronger than me, Evelyn. Stronger than I ever admitted. I hope you find peace, and I hope our children remember me as more than my mistakes. though I don't deserve that grace. Charles. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't feel pity or anger, only a quiet sense of closure. Charles's story was no longer intertwined with hers, except as a reminder of how far she had come. As winter settled in, Evelyn stood on the balcony of her estate, watching the snow blanket the gardens below. Rebecca and Mark had joined her for the holidays, filling the house with warmth and joy. Laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with the faint sound of carolers in the distance. The stars twinkled above, and Evelyn felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had tested her in ways she never could have imagined, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and freer. This chapter of her life was over. The next one, she knew, would be filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. One she had built with her own strength and resilience. The turning of the year brought fresh beginnings for Evelyn Marston. Her name was now etched not in scandal, but in triumph, a symbol of reinvention and grace. As the Phoenix Project expanded to new cities, Evelyn's foundation began offering workshops and educational programs for young adults, teaching financial literacy, emotional resilience, and the importance of self-worth. Evelyn herself was thriving. She had taken up painting, a hobby she had abandoned in her 20s, when life with Charles consumed her every moment. Her studio, nestled in a bright corner of the estate, became a sanctuary. The canvases she created were vivid and expressive, full of the life she now embraced so fully. One evening, Rebecca arrived at the estate with exciting news. Over dinner, she hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mom, I've been offered a job, a big one. It's a leadership position with a nonprofit in New York. They focus on empowering women in underserved communities." Evelyn's face lit up. "Rebecca, that's incredible. It's everything you've been working toward." Rebecca smiled, though her eyes were tinged with emotion. "I'm going to miss being here, helping with the foundation. I feel like we've built something amazing together." "You have," Evelyn said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "But this is your path, Rebecca. You've grown into an extraordinary woman, and it's time for you to shine on your own." Mark, seated across the table, chimed in with a grin. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll still be around to drive you crazy." Evelyn laughed. "That's a relief. The estate would be too quiet without at least one of you causing trouble." As Rebecca prepared for her move, Evelyn found herself reflecting on her journey. The quiet moments brought unexpected clarity. She thought often of Charles, not with anger, but with a sense of detachment. He was part of her past, a chapter that had shaped her but no longer defined her. One afternoon, as she sorted through old photos, she came across an image from their early years together. They were young, carefree, and full of promise. Evelyn studied it for a moment before placing it in a box marked memories, not to be forgotten, but to remain where it belonged, tucked away, part of a life she had left behind. In late spring, Evelyn received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference. The event, attended by prominent figures from around the country, was an opportunity for her to share her story and inspire others. Standing before a packed auditorium, Evelyn felt a surge of emotion as she began to speak. "For many years, I lived in the shadow of someone else's choices. I told myself it was easier to stay silent, to endure. But the truth is, silence doesn't protect us. It imprisons us. Breaking free wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And now, every challenge I've faced has become part of a foundation I've built to stand tall. My story is just one of many, and I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your life." The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that left Evelyn humbled and proud. After the speech, women of all ages approached her, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. One young woman, barely out of her teens, tearfully said, "You've given me the courage to leave a toxic relationship. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Evelyn hugged her, whispering, "You are stronger than you know. Trust yourself." Back at the estate, Evelyn received a letter from the warden of the penitentiary where Charles was serving his sentence. It informed her that Charles had been granted parole, citing good behavior and cooperation with the authorities. The news stirred little emotion in Evelyn. She had long since accepted that his journey was his own to navigate. On the evening of Rebecca's farewell party, Evelyn stood in the gardens, watching her children laugh together under the golden glow of string lights. Marjorie approached, a glass of wine in hand. "You did it, Evelyn," Marjorie said, smiling. "You rebuilt everything they tried to take from you." "No," Evelyn replied, her gaze soft but determined. "I didn't rebuild it. I created something entirely new." As the night wore on and laughter filled the air, Evelyn stepped away to the balcony overlooking the estate. The stars above were as brilliant as ever, a reminder of life's endless possibilities. Evelyn Marston was no longer tethered to the pain of her past. She was a woman of strength, vision, and boundless hope. The chapters ahead were hers to write, and she intended to fill them with courage, love, and the promise of a life fully lived. The final chapter of Evelyn Marston's journey unfolded with a quiet elegance, a culmination of every choice she had made to reclaim her life. The estate, now a vibrant community hub, thrived under the stewardship of a team she had carefully assembled. Evelyn, having built something greater than she had ever imagined, began to pull back, leaving room for others to take the reins. It wasn't a retreat. It was the natural evolution of a woman who had found her place in the world. On a warm summer evening, Evelyn hosted one last grand event at the estate. It wasn't a gala or a celebration of accomplishments, but a gathering of friends, family, and those whose lives had been touched by her work. The atmosphere was alive with laughter, music, and heartfelt connections. Rebecca flew in from New York, glowing with pride at the work she was doing in her new role. Mark arrived with blueprints for a new community center, a project inspired by his mother's vision. Marjorie, as always, was at Evelyn's side, her presence a constant reminder of the power of friendship. As the evening wore on, Evelyn took a moment to step away from the crowd. She wandered into the garden, where the moonlight danced on the petals of her favorite roses. She breathed in the warm night air, the faint sound of music and laughter carrying from the house. She found herself by the fountain, the same one where, years ago, she had stood questioning her future. Now it felt like a symbol of renewal, a testament to how far she had come. She closed her eyes, letting the serenity of the moment wash over her. "Mind if I join you?" Rebecca's voice broke the silence. Evelyn turned to see her daughter, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to Evelyn, and they stood together, gazing at the fountain. "You've built something incredible, Mom," Rebecca said softly. "Not just the foundation, but this life, your life. You inspire me every single day." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Rebecca. But what I'm most proud of is you and Mark. You've become everything I could have hoped for, and more." They clinked glasses, the soft chime echoing in the stillness of the garden. The next morning, Evelyn packed a small bag and left the estate for a long overdue journey. It wasn't a dramatic departure. She wasn't leaving permanently, only exploring. Her first destination was a small coastal town she had visited as a young girl, a place that had lingered in her memory as a symbol of peace and possibility. As the train carried her through rolling hills and sunlit fields, Evelyn reflected on the life she had lived. It had been full of twists and turns, heartbreaks and triumphs. But through it all, she had found herself. The girl who had once dreamed of a life filled with love and adventure was still there, but now she carried the wisdom of her years and the strength of her resilience. When she arrived at her destination, she checked into a quaint inn overlooking the sea. The scent of salt water filled the air, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore was a balm for her soul. She spent her days walking along the beach, sketching in her notebook, and speaking with locals who knew nothing of her past and cared only about the kind woman who shared their sunsets. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn sat on a weathered bench, her sketchbook open in her lap. She watched the sky transform into a canvas of oranges and purples, the colors blending seamlessly into the sea. For the first time in her life, she felt truly complete. She wasn't just Evelyn Marston, the survivor of a public scandal or the woman who had rebuilt her life. She was Evelyn, an artist, a mother, a friend, and above all, a woman who had learned to embrace every moment, every challenge, and every victory as part of the tapestry of her life. And as the stars began to twinkle above, Evelyn smiled, knowing that her story, though filled with struggles, was a masterpiece.